You're listening to the Go Get Them Show. This is a discussion that inspires entrepreneurs to pursue their passion to create meaningful, impactful, and sustainable companies in Asia, Africa, and LATAM. This is your host, Maxon T, together with my co-hosts, Arun Krishnakumar and Sheila Mburu. We sit down with entrepreneurs, operators, and investors across frontier markets to discover their experiences, lessons learned, and how they made an impact. So,
playing music is a lot more fun. I do a couple of gigs every month. I live in Cape Town now. I've lived here for the last 11 years.
And what kind of LPs are we attracting? And the layers, it's a journey. It has been a journey and a very eye-opening journey for me personally.
Max, over to you.
Cool. For this episode, we have Zachariah George, or Zach. So Zach is the managing partner of Launch Africa Ventures, a frontier Pan-African fund, solving significant funding gap in seed to Series A bridge funding investment landscape in Africa. So Launch Africa Ventures invests in B2B and B2B2C early stage tech-driven startups that are solving some of the most significant problems in the continent. Launch Africa Ventures portfolio companies are dozen of them. It's amazing. So some of the key companies that we all probably know would be PayHippo, Kuda, Nabu, Gozum, Omnibiz, Trove, Peach Payments, Mobiz, AfriX, Bypass, and even more. So Zach started his career at Lehman Brothers and Barclays Investment Bank before joining Old Mutual South Africa as a specialist financial advisor. He subsequently spent 3 years at UStart as the head of Africa Investments before joining Absa Group as a program director for Barclays Tech Lab Africa. He also spent some time in Alan Gray Orbis Foundation as the director of ventures, setting up the accelerator program. And Zach, most recently, Zach was the co-founder, managing partner, and CIO of Startup Bootcamp African Tech and the principal at NetBank Ventures and Alternative Investments. Zach holds BTech Mechanical Engineering from IIT Madras and a master's in management and finance from Stanford. And this is the interesting fact. Outside of his professional life, Zach is also an acoustic guitarist, vocalist with cover albums Give a Little and Humans with Hearts on iTunes and Spotify. Do check that out. So, Zach, first question for you. If you could have been an artist, why turn into a venture capitalist? It would have been so much more fun.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. When people ask me what I do, I often just say, "Hey, I'm just a musician that happens to love spreadsheets." Because playing music is a lot more fun. I do a couple of gigs every month. I live in Cape Town now. I've lived here for the last 11 years. So I do a gig the last Thursday of every month and the first Monday of every month. I just love blues, rock and roll, country, folk, acoustic. I've been playing since I was 12, and it's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, most artists that I know are flat broke, and they either live with their parents or are literally just going from gig to gig to just pay the bills. And it's unfortunate because it's an industry that has some of the most creative, passionate people I know on this planet. And it's a pity that those creative genes don't result in a lot of commercial value unless you happen to know producers and studios. So I keep music completely non-commercial. I do it for the love of it. And I use my right brain from an analytical perspective. But you know what's funny though is I feel that the fact that I do a lot of music on the side improves my productivity at work by a factor of 5 or 10. So if I didn't have music, art, and theater, I probably wouldn't enjoy doing the VC work that I do. So it sort of balances your left versus your right brain. And it actually helps me evaluate entrepreneurs a lot better. That's something that I often mention is when you do early stage investing in tech and tech enabled companies, a lot of the due diligence needs to be on the entrepreneur, their creativity, their passion, their motivation. And if everything in life boils down to an equation or a spreadsheet or a series of mathematical numbers, you don't always make the best decisions. So I feel that my creative side that I've had since I was 12 helps a lot better with decision making and gut assessment of people
Mm-hmm.
than just looking at spreadsheets and presentations. So it actually works out pretty well. Yeah.
Zach, first of all, thanks for coming on this show. It was exciting to find that you are a musician and you're also an IIT. You also did your undergrad from IIT Madras. So we have a lot in common.
Oh, did you go to IIT as well? Oh, wow.
No, I didn't, and I keep getting told off for that in my family all the time. But I get a lot of that. But the question I had was from IIT Madras to Stanford and now in Africa. How do you explain that journey?
Yeah, it was a tough one. I've been in South Africa for 11 years now, and I still get asked that question. Why would you leave Silicon Valley? Why would you leave New York and come all the way to Africa? Even today, 11 years later, I'm like, guys, girls, you need to stop asking me that question. It's been 11 years now. The reality is twofold. I mean, there are two reasons. One of it is personal. I spent 7 years on Wall Street at Lehman and at Barclays, and while it was extremely rewarding from a personal development, intellectual, and experience standpoint. I mean, I would recommend anyone in their 20s to go work on Wall Street, right? It makes you tough. It makes you strong. It gives you incredible resilience and the ability to soak in. I mean, literally just to be a sponge, to just learn everything you can. You don't care about the number of hours you work. You just care about networking with some of the smartest people on the planet. And then secondly, just learning a lot. I mean, if you're a proactive learner, you can learn everything you need to learn about not just finance and banking, but the clients that you serve. So if you work in investment banking, you can learn so much about an industry that you may not even learn working at, a division of a corporate in that industry. So it's incredibly valuable. But at the same time, the toll that you take on your personal life is quite a lot. You work a lot of hours, often with not just little sleep, but your social life is, significantly affected, and you start to forget your place in the world, and you don't have much of a head, heart, soul balance, which is very important for me. So at some point, you have to leave the system to sort of look at. So you can't look at yourself unless you take a step back. So I took a sabbatical in. So obviously the bankruptcy of Lehman happened in 2008. I happened to have taken a small sabbatical just before the bankruptcy to go and volunteer at an orphanage in Ghana. I had a bit of a aha moment where I started to question what I was doing, and I came back from Ghana in 2008 and just realized that something was wrong with the system. There was too much greed. There was too much. I'm nothing against capitalism. I think capitalism has pushed the world forward, and the pursuit and the pursuit of ambition and the American dream, for example, is just something that's pushed a lot of new innovations in this on this planet. But I think when that crosses a line where you step on the shoes of others and put them down, and you will do anything at the cost to maximize profits, that line is a very slippery slope. So, taking a sabbatical to come to Africa in 2008 to volunteer was had a big impact in my life. And literally a few weeks later, Lehman went bankrupt. So it was almost a sign from the universe saying, follow your heart. But I often give talks about that. You can't always just follow your heart and ignore reality. So if you wanted to save the world and do good in 2008, I mean, all the foundations were broke because they were funded by the asset managers. So it was a tough time. So I decided to stay on at Barclays for a couple of years. Barclays bought Lehman, at least in North America. And I was at Barclays for a couple of years and took another mini vacation for a couple of weeks to come to South Africa in 2010 to watch the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup. So I was here on a 3 or 4 week holiday to watch some football. And I joke around saying that a 4 week holiday has become an 11-year holiday. I just haven't caught my flight back. But the reality is, something really hit me. I was very young. I was 28 when I came to South Africa. 29, I think. And I noticed that there was a huge gap in emerging markets, but specifically in Africa when it came to entrepreneurship, just small business development. I mean, the word venture capital barely existed anywhere in Africa, 11 years ago. So Cape Town and South Africa, I mean, and Cape Town specifically, is an exceptionally beautiful city. People often compare it to San Francisco. It's San Francisco, the Silicon Valley of Africa. It is absolutely gorgeous: mountains, ocean, sea, sand, surf, coffee, wine. It's a third the cost of living of San Francisco, so you can't get better than that. But apart from all that, it has lots of similarities to Silicon Valley. It's got incredible designers, developers, digital ad marketing agencies, and it's got the right mix of innovation and tech and creative skills to literally create a culture or a subculture of innovation. And that's when I decided that I would try taking a year off and look at whether I could help build the venture ecosystem in Africa, but with Cape Town as my base, right? And 11 years later, we've now helped myself, along with several other players in the ecosystem, have now helped pioneer the VC industry on the continent, which takes a lot of hard work. It's several years in the making, a decade in the making, but anything worth achieving comes with a lot of patience and perseverance, and that's something that I've strongly believed, and I'm proud of what we've achieved as a country and as a continent more than anything else.
That's really interesting. I'm roughly the same age when you arrived in Africa. My question to you is, how did you come to that realization when it comes to like decision making process at that point in time? Is it just more of external factors where you look at things, right? Like you saw the ingredients, but they're just not coming together, and you thought you would help to go in and make a difference? Just keen to get your thoughts around your observation, your decision making process, and ultimately to the result that you have today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, it's every decision that you make. I mean, at the end of the day, I joke around people saying that you can take you can take a man or a woman out of Wall Street, but you can't take Wall Street out of them. So I mean, the 7 years I spent in banking, infused a sense of making analytical, logical decisions on everything I do, right? So I wasn't going to come and make South Africa or Africa my home just because I thought it was cool and fun and I could have an impact. There has to be a commercial reason to it, in addition to all the quote unquote soft benefits of it. So the commercial decision was very simple. This is a continent that has 1.5 or 1.3 to 1.4 billion people, right? So even though it's a continent, if you compare it to India and China, similar-ish demographics from a population standpoint. But unlike India and China, the growth on this continent, so if you look at where the world's population is today and where the world's population is predicted to be in the next 80 years, the turn of the century, the world's population is expected to be around 11.5 to 12 billion by the turn of the century, right? The net increase in 4.5 to 5 billion people, 85 to 90% of that is expected to come from Africa. 85 to 90% of that, right? Not India, not China, not Latin America, right? So in the next 70 to 80 years, you're going to have 1 in 3 people on this entire planet living in Africa, right? So if you were like me, where I always think long term, you have 1 in 3 people, 4 billion people living in Africa. That's either a massive challenge from an infrastructure perspective in terms of healthcare, education, food, water, construction, mining, every single industry, or it's a huge opportunity, right? And I've always been a glass half full kind of person. So I've said, Africa has historically always leapfrogged innovation. So Africa, for example, didn't have a TDMA. They went straight to GSM, and from a phone perspective, from a telco perspective. Africa completely skipped the copper lines and cable lines, and they went straight to mobile. Similar thing with banking. We went straight to mobile banking before having to deal with the complexities of traditional financial institutions. So in a lot of ways, necessity is the mother of not just invention, but the mother of innovation, right? So, and a lot of innovations are happening in Africa because they are required versus they are nice to have, right? So now you work the math out, you're going to have 4 billion people in this continent in the next 2 generations. Where are you going to be investing all your money from a tech innovation standpoint? Are you going to be investing it into the US, where you have a declining population? Not declining, but a sort of relatively flatline population. You're going to be looking into Western Europe, where the population is actually declining from a growth perspective. Or would you look at Asia or Latin America? And from a pure demographic and consumer purchasing power perspective, Africa was a no-brainer, right? So that was one of the key reasons why I thought, okay, if I can spend my 30s building venture in Africa, I literally, and if I get it right with the right people to partner with, I literally will have an unfair advantage over everyone else, because people have ignored Africa in possibly every major industry except for primary resources, aka minerals, right? And basic primary agriculture. So outside of agriculture and mining, Africa has pretty much been ignored, right? So everything in healthcare, education, technology, mobility, logistics, financial services, people have largely ignored it. And now you suddenly have 1.5 billion people growing to 4 billion people. And who's going to be at the forefront of innovation unless you physically live on the continent? So that's one of the reasons why it made absolute sense for me to make this home. And if you look at where the VC industry in Africa has grown from, I mean, when I came here in 2010, 2011, there was about $20 million of venture capital on the whole continent of Africa. And if you fast forward 9 years, that number is now 2.5 billion, right? So it's grown by more than 100x. 100x, not percent, 100x in 9 years, right? You don't see those growth rates anywhere else in the world. Granted, the base was low, but still, it's incredible. And I've always said, if you can have a large piece of us, what's that? The whole have a small piece of a big pond or pie, versus just being a small fish in a big pond, like in the Valley or in India or in London, I'd always take the former than the latter. So here we are. So, and it's
maybe let's
and I mean from a cost of not cost of living from a cost of living versus quality of life perspective, you can't get better than here. So
I'm sold. I'm going to Africa. That's cool. I love it.
Let's maybe spend some time talking about Launch Africa, if that's okay, Zach. Can you tell us a bit more about your fund? I would like to understand your approach to investing, particularly. Are you positioning yourself as a impact investor or just a returns based investor? What's your thesis like behind behind the fund?
I think maybe I'll take a step back, and I mean, I will definitely talk about Launch Africa. It's what I've been doing for the last year, but I want to just give you some context as to how Launch Africa came about, right? So when I landed here 11 years ago, I realized that it was a complete greenfield. There were very few entrepreneurs, so there were a lot of SMEs, and this is an important point. Lots of SMEs and small businesses that were focused on profitability and cash flows, and just mom and pop stores, for lack of a better word. That's a life and blood of a lot of emerging markets: India, China, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa is no exception. But entrepreneurs that run startups versus SMEs, very different, right? So there were very few tech entrepreneurs, or tech-enabled entrepreneurs. So, anyone could have said, "Hey, I'm going to come here and start a fund." Anyone can raise capital, right? If you have the right connections. But what is very hard to engineer is good deals, right? Because the whole part of investing in startups and high growth, high impact startups is you have to have a culture of understanding how to grow virally your top line, customers, transaction volumes, and not just focus on creating a lifestyle business for you and your family and your friends, which is what differentiates startups from SMEs. So when I came here first, I said, if technology can help leapfrog this continent, then it has to be done in a structured way through either an incubator, an accelerator, some sort of a venture building startup studio model. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly dependent on debt, right? Asset-based financing and traditional ways of growing companies, which have been around since, hundreds of years, right? So instead of starting a fund, my focus was more on how can we venture build? So how can we create things like accelerators and incubators to get really smart, mostly tech-centric founders to create products and services that the end consumers could use and could relate to. And one of the biggest challenges that we faced at the time was distribution, right? And this is a very, very important point, because unlike the US and possibly now India, China, and Western Europe, B2C business models can easily be scaled because there's a lot of understanding and sophistication around how to grow your customer base with the right CRM, the right marketing spend, etc. But in emerging markets like Latin America and Africa and perhaps Southeast Asia, the cost of distribution is ridiculously high. The cost of acquiring customers is very high, right? So a lot of, because penetration rates of the internet are quite low, e-commerce penetration is also quite low. So how do you acquire customers and how do you increase your purchasing power? Well, the one way you can do that is through channeling your distribution through insurance companies, financial services institutions, banks, retailers, telcos, and big tech companies, right? So if you want to ultimately do something innovative as an entrepreneur, but you can't reach customers, well, guess what? You need to work with the 4 or 5 sectors that I mentioned above, right? But you have to do it in a way in which it feels like a win-win for everyone, right? So the large banks that are desperately looking for innovative solutions in mobile payments, in cross-border remittances, in payment gateways, in peer-to-peer transfers of money. I mean, in KYC, in sort of solutions in the crypto space, a lot of these large corporates struggle to be innovative and struggle to be in tune and in touch with what their customers want. And that's where startups have the ability to create solutions for large corporates and for their clients, right? So that's why I mentioned earlier, like our fund right now was built on the B2B or B2B2C business model, not B2C, right? So we then decided with a bunch of people to build an accelerator that helped corporate startup collaboration very early on, and that solved a big challenge around distribution on the continent. So we built the first accelerator in Africa called Barclays Tech Lab Africa, and you mentioned earlier that you were at Barclays. You probably heard of, I mean, you're familiar with Barclays Techstars, right?
Yeah.
So before Techstars came to Africa, Barclays needed to know that the concept of an accelerator could actually work in Africa. So they asked me as an ex-Barclays employee from New York, not that there was a direct connection, but it's just safety numbers, familiar thing. Oh, that so and so was an ex-Barclays, Barclays management. So there was a bit of comfort around that. So then I literally used the Y Combinator playbook and said, okay, let's build an accelerator. And so we did that in 2015, which was so avant-garde, as in like no one knew what an accelerator was, right? To the point that we didn't even take equity because the concept of taking equity to mentor someone was so unheard of. And then with that experience, it blew the minds of all these executives at the organization at the time at Barclays and said, gosh, imagine if we could do this and it not be mutually exclusive to just one corporate. So we then set up startup. So then Techstars ran 2 cohorts in 2016 and 2017. I've never been a big fan of one corporate controlling the narrative around innovation. So Startup Bootcamp, which is the largest accelerator in the world outside of the US. The US, it's mostly YC 500 and Techstars. But outside of the US, Startup Bootcamp is pretty much the most dominant one. They approached us and said, hey, listen, you guys have run a global accelerator in Africa. You've been in the continent for, at the time, 6 or 7 years. Will you consider running Startup Bootcamp in Africa? And I said, that's such an incredible challenge to do. And the request was cover the entire continent. So I'm like, geez, I do take up a lot of challenges, but like to run an accelerator for the whole continent was a bit challenging. And at the time I just gotten married and, a baby was on the way. So it was an interesting challenge, but I never say no to things. What did Richard Branson say? Better ask for forgiveness than permission. So I just said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. So yeah, I lived on a plane for about 3 years and lots of trips to Kenya, Nigeria, Morocco. It was an incredible experience meeting entrepreneurs from all over the continent that was so hungry for success, incredible tech skills. You've probably heard of Andela. Andela is close to being a unicorn. They're the edtech company that Zuckerberg and Al Gore backed. Pretty much, creating Africa as the boiler room, for lack of a better word, for some of the top tech talent in Silicon Valley. So just a lot of really cool talent. And what we did as an accelerator was we married this raw tech talent with corporates from a distribution standpoint, and we could create incredible fintechs, mostly fintechs at the point, but fintechs, companies in the logistics, healthcare, edtech space, and it was beautiful. So once we launched a Startup Bootcamp and we were truly sector agnostic and devoid of any single corporate exclusivity, because we had insurance partners, retail partners, banking partners, tech partners. So we had Google and AWS as our tech partners. We had PwC as our sort of accounting audit partners. We had NetBank and Old Mutual as our banking and insurance partners. So all of a sudden you have these corporates that are setting aside not just money and time, but also resources to do POCs, proof of concepts and pilots with these incredible entrepreneurs. And in exchange, Startup Bootcamp as accelerator has an 8% stake in these companies. And you're literally buying your own deal flow because you know that the corporates that are in the program are part of the selection process that chooses who goes into the cohort. So if someone, let's say, I'm a company that builds chatbots, and I can do work for a bank and an insurance company. Well, guess what? You won't get into our accelerator unless you've been pre-vetted by the corporates. And then now you go through 3 months in our program. So we're going to, douse you with everything from business model canvas to tech to CRM to sales to IP to legal. And at the end of 3 months, you know that you have these corporates that are waiting to do contracts with you, right? So you're literally reverse engineering your own deal flow. And you now do this for 3 or 4 years across the continent, and you've got literally thousands of startups that just want to be in your program. And then that creates other accelerators. Plug and Play came to Africa after us. Google Launchpad came into Africa. So did Founders Factory. So with one accelerator starting in 2016, we now have close to 50 accelerators on the continent, right? Even regional ones. So that was the genesis of so I made a conscious effort to not start a fund when I first came in, but to rather build ventures with founders and be the most founder-friendly mentor and guide to startups through an accelerator. And then on the back, and also I did a ton of angel investing at the time. And then about a year ago, it just said, okay, cool, we have this incredible deal flow and pipeline. Now we can build a fund, right? So that's why it just made complete sense that we have all these incredible pre-Series A seed ventures that are investment ready because they've got their HR, IP, legal, marketing, CRM sorted by the accelerators, and now they're ready for capital to get to Series A. So we've positioned ourselves as the top seed VC fund in the continent. And I don't need to physically have people in Cairo, in Nairobi, in Lagos, in Casablanca, and in Abidjan. We spent 4 to 5 years through accelerators, so we've got incredible ambassadors on the ground that can help us with DD and with deal flow, and that's where we are right now. So Launch Africa is the leading Pan-African seed VC fund. It was targeted as a $15 million fund. We got oversubscribed very quickly, so we're now looking at $20 to $25 million, and we're sitting at 15 at the moment. So there's a small amount left for other LPs. But true to our word, we've already done. We had our first close in September, and last year, and we've already done 40 investments across the continent. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and we allow all our LPs in the fund. Most of our LPs are individuals, like the two of you, just individuals investing anywhere from as little as $25,000 to as much as our largest LP is $3 million. It's a very prominent European family office. We have more than 90 LPs in our fund, and it's just an incredible journey. But the one thing I'll sort of end with this before I take more questions is it's also understanding the mechanism around exits, which is super important, right? Most VC funds on the continent struggle because they only make money when they have big winners, the so-called unicorns, right? So you invest in 20 companies and you expect 16 of them to fail and 2 of them to maybe do, about $50 to $100 million in valuation. You expect 2 unicorns, right? I'm not a big fan of that model. I still love my unicorns, and so does my daughter, who's 7, but a different kind of unicorn. But I still, I'm a one part of me is very conservative. I mean, I blame it on my 7 years on Wall Street, my risk. But I want to make sure that the companies that aren't absolute rocket ships, but are growing steadily and are going to do Series A and Series B rounds in 2 or 3 years, I need to be able to get some liquidity out of them as well. So part of our thesis is we will be one of the only institutional investors that covers the entire African continent, and we will lead seed rounds of African tech startups when normally you'd only have angels, friends, and family, right? And maybe the odd local regional VC. So we now say, okay, we really like this deal. It's come through this accelerator. We like the founders. We love the corporate relationships that they have. We're going to put in, let's say, our investments vary between $200,000 and $300,000, but we allow our LPs to co-invest with us for free. Keyword being for free. Most funds never allow you to co-invest without charging you some sort of carry or management fee. So now, and we have about 90 plus LPs. So our LPs can invest with us for free. And you can, the average seed round in Africa is between between $500,000 and $2 million. We can now take out an entire seed round, or at least lead a seed round between just ourselves and our LPs. And now these companies are able to focus more on operations and growth than on fundraising. You'd be amazed how much time founders spend on fundraising. They sometimes spend 60 to 70% of their time fundraising, when you should be spending maybe 10% of your time, right? So now they focus on operations because they've got less to worry about, right? They can get to their Series A a lot quicker in 6 to 12 months, 18 months at the most versus 3 years. And in exchange for that, we say, when you do your A rounds or your A plus or your B rounds, we want to have the option to take some money off the table, right? And so we get a lot of our liquidity on our investments through secondaries. we'll always leave some juice in the tank when these companies either get sold or have the classic J curve. But we have a significant focus on downside protection and liquidity more than anything else than just unicorns. And that's a key reason why a lot of LPs have invested in us, is because they actually believe that as a true VC, you can have your upsides, but you also don't have the massive risk that VC investing has. So I'll pause there because I'm sure there are a lot of follow-up questions that you guys have, but that's sort of the genesis of Launch Africa.
Yeah, I do have a follow-up question for you, Zach. In terms of your ecosystem knowledge within Africa, especially being an emerging market space, there is often an interplay between public and private finance, right? So how do you see that working? Is that I mean, I'm sure there is quite a lot of efficiencies to be had in the way public and private finance support each other, but what have your experiences been so far in kind of bringing those two together and helping your portfolio firms?
Yeah, listen, I mean, this is just my personal experience is we try and stay away from too much reliance on public money, right? There's a reason for that. That there have been so many issues around tenders and government interference. You start getting into political discussions, natural resources, awarding of contracts. It's just not something that I personally want to play in, right? Africa has been known for, I mean, if you look at the oil and gas, the industry, the heavy industry, power, mining, it's just not something that augurs well to pure entrepreneurship and innovation-driven cultures. So I try my level best to not look at industries that are very reliant on government backing or government contracts, right? So that's why, I mean, and this is one of the reasons why, by the way, if I may add, private equity in Africa was slated to be one of the biggest things on the continent. I mean, McKinsey wrote a massive report about, was it 15 years ago, talking about the lions of Africa and private equity. I mean, what happened to that? I mean, it's gone nowhere. Private equity in Africa has, I wouldn't say been a disappointment, but it's not yielded the results that the KKRs, the Carlyles, and the Blackstones thought it would be, right? And a big reason for that is political risk, government risk, currency risk, and a lot of things that are just not conducive to true growth in GDP. So, I'm going to be that controversial guy on a podcast and say that I don't really think that in the VC industry, public-private collaboration and partnership is necessarily required, and I'm not going to shove a round peg down a square hole, or a square peg down a round hole, whatever way you look at it. So I would very gladly look at private money from angels, family offices, and VCs. I would I look, or I mean, we actively look at other VCs in the US, Asia, and Europe. We don't particularly work a lot with governments in Africa, and we don't need to. At least not in this space. You have to be aware that certain industries like financial services, payments, require licenses and regulation, and for that you have to often look at giving someone their pound of flesh. But to the extent that it's not an absolute requirement, we just stay away from it.
Cool. I have a question, just a follow-up question. You obviously have a lot of, I would say, experiences in setting up accelerators all the way up to eventually angel investments, then now venture investment funds. What are some of the things that you wish you knew before you started?
Say that again?
What is something that you wish you knew before you started, right? Having gone through your whole 11 years of setting up funds and, really invigorating the venture ecosystem in the whole continent. It's no easy feat. So yeah, what are some of the things that you wish you knew?
Yeah,
Having done all that?
I mean, honestly, not a lot, but I would probably say it took us a while to convince corporate Africa to understand that working with startups was in their best interests. It's very hard to convince corporates to take minority stakes in startups. They don't get it. It's like oil and water, right? A corporate's mentality, I come from corporate. I spent 7 years in corporate before moving to South Africa. Corporates look at startups in two ways. I'm making it. I'm oversimplifying this, but they look at startups either as, ooh, it's a recipient of CSI donations. I get the nice, photo and check on my, my yearly handbook, and I have a few photos of my executives with some poor kids in the hood, and I get some points for it. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but the reality is corporates have always looked at startups and small businesses as nice from an image and marketing perspective. And in South Africa, as is the case with a lot of countries, corporates are required to give between 2 and 3% of the after-tax profits to CSI. Right? So they put startups in the same bucket as foundations. The other way they look at startups is saying anyone that is doing something innovative that I can't do, let me see if I can buy them. Right?
Yeah.
And it's very easy to tempt someone with $1 million check, because to that person, that's a lot of money. It's ridiculously low multiples on revenue or earnings. So corporates look at buying startups more from a defensive FOMO perspective than really wanting to work with them. So for a very long time in Africa, corporates would look at startups purely from either a CSI perspective or an acquisition standpoint. There was very little understanding of how we can work with someone. So if someone builds an online platform to do, peer-to-peer insurance through, micro insurance platforms, but peer-to-peer, a big insurance company would say they would never think until recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, oh gosh, how can we work with them? They'd be like, okay, how can we just buy these guys out? And they'd pay them a small amount of money. I mean, we had a famous case of in South Africa, someone building are you guys familiar with Mint in the US? Mint is the personal savings app. So there was a version of Mint here called 22/7. Incredible. I mean, all the young millennials here loved it because they could track their savings, the interest they made on their bank accounts. They could track how their overdraft facilities were. They could track their spending. It was a really cool app. And then you had a big insurance company that said, hey, wait a minute, why are you stepping on my turf? I'm going to buy you guys out. And then they bought them, and it was a complete shit show. It was a disaster because it was run by a corporate, right? And then the company pretty much self-destructed, right? I mean, the founders got paid a decent amount of money, but the opportunity was lost, right? Similar thing. I mean, everyone loves Apple Pay, but there was a version of Apple Pay called SnapScan in South Africa, which was 3 years before Apple Pay even launched. And it was cross-device, cross-operating system, cross-hardware, significantly better UX and UI than Apple Pay. And no one's ever heard of it, except a few people in Cape Town and Johannesburg, because a big bank here said that they would just buy it out because they could. And it never grew, right? So corporates have struggled to work with startups because they don't understand how that works. So if I could go back and change something, I would probably, before even raising a single dollar and running any single accelerator, I would just go and take some of the top B2B and B2B2C startups in the US and in India and in China, and just bring them to corporate Africa and says, hey, you dimwits, this is how you should work with these startups, right? And then it would have saved me 3 years of my life in trying to run these programs, because they would just say, yep, we get it. Here's some money. Show us some good innovations that we can invest in. So that was probably something I do. But would it have changed? No. I think organically corporate Africa woke up to this because of what happened in the industry. they saw similar corporates in the US, in Europe, and in India and China working with startups. I mean, the likes of Alipay and Paytm and Airbnb and all these companies. And I said, listen, we have to. Oh, and by the way, there are a couple of people like Zach that are doing stuff like that. Maybe we should work with them. Right. So I would probably change that if I could, but nothing much beyond that.
Yeah. I think till today, most of the corporates do behave very similarly until they feel threatened, until their bottom line get hit. They will never change because they're paid to steer the ship in a similar way from how they do it for the past 10 years, which is mad. But yeah, anyway. Arun?
Yeah, I mean, one last question for you, Zach, if that's okay,
Yeah,
when we'll close it. What are you most optimistic about the continent? There's quite a lot to feel optimistic about Africa, but what are you most optimistic about?
I would say, I mean, there's a huge amount of, like I said, the consumer purchasing power is growing exponentially, right? So there are more people that have cell phones now in Africa per capita than anywhere else in the world. Like, this is a statistic that I tell people, and they are absolutely shocked. So per capita, more Africans have cell phones than people even in places like India and China that have much higher populations, right? It's because the cost of devices has come down dramatically, and people don't have the time, energy, and resources to have formal banking, formal insurance, and they transact using their devices, right? So now, if you look at the opportunity in industries like healthcare, for example, so I'd say healthcare, education, and then broadly a third category is mobility, logistics, and I'm gonna call it supply chain, right? Which includes agri-tech, food tech, retail tech, logistics, IoT, etc. But these broad sectors have a huge amount of disruption that technology can bring to them. And I mean, you'd asked a question earlier about impact. I mean, I try my level best to not shove the word impact down people's throats. It's because there is a ridiculous amount of impact anyways in what we do. I can tell you now, the 40 companies we've invested in have, on average, they're creating about, eventually over a 5-year period, more than close to 50 jobs per company, right? And then the multiplier effect of that is even more, right? So if you run a commercially sustainable enterprise that employs people, and the economies of scale in Africa mean that you can employ at least 3 or 4 more people in Africa for the exact same kind of industry and work than you would in the US or Europe. So from a job creation, improvement in living standards, healthcare, education, and access to resources and mobility, you're doing so much more from an impact perspective if you run a repeatable, sustainable, and scalable tech business. So that's what I'm most excited about is, where things like sensors, drones, robotics, AI can be used in Africa with the double benefit of commercial returns as well as socioeconomic impact and environmental impact. It's harder to find a more apt place in the world than in Africa. So that's what I'm most excited about. And by the way, the returns that you're seeing on the continent are mind-blowing. I mean, I'll just sort of end off with this. When people talk about it's tough to make returns, I mean, the average valuation of seed startups in Africa is sort of, I mean, pre-seed, we're talking of less than $1 million, right? Pre-seed. Seed between $1 million and at the very most $10 million. And then at Series A, you're batting at the same averages as Series A startups in the US and in mature parts of Asia. So, Series A valuations are starting at 25, going all the way up to $100 million. So if you're getting into early in these deals, you're easily making 5 to 10 times your money in 3 to 5 years, right? And if you do this now across multiple sectors, healthcare, financial services, insurance, I mean, there's a lot of return to be made financially. So, I mean, one of the startups that, our biggest success story to date is a digital bank in Nigeria that went through our accelerator, I mean, our valuation when we got in was $250,000. That bank is now worth $500 million in 2.5 years, right? So you hear of similar stories in the U.S. and in Asia, but your starting valuation for a digital bank would be like $10 million. Like you won't even. But in Africa, because the perception and the reality are very different, you can invest as a seed investor at a valuation of $1 million or $500,000, right? But there's no chance you can do that anywhere else. So that's why this is literally an arbitrage game. I call it valuation arbitrage. And it won't last forever, but for the next 3 to 5 years, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach. This is so amazing. I'll look to move to Cape Town one day and probably invest in Africa as well. I'll definitely bring you up. Cool. So if people want to reach out and want to learn more about Launch Africa, where can they reach you?
Yeah, I mean, you could reach me. I mean, I don't mind people emailing me, and our website is launchafrica.vc. It's very simple, and you can send an email to info@launchafrica.vc, or me personally, Zach, Z-A-C-H, at launchafrica.vc. So if you're either an entrepreneur that's building something really cool and has some initial traction, we look at traction of at least $20,000 in monthly revenue recurring, or if you're a potential investor that wants to get exposure to the largest sort of portfolio of tech startups in Africa at relatively lucrative valuations, and for as little as $50,000, you can be an LP in our fund. We've got unlimited space open for new LPs, and just anyone who wants to know about the industry, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to share some of our learnings over the last 10 years with you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Zach. It's great having you.
Likewise.
Looking forward to all the great stuff that's going to come up from Africa.
Awesome.
Amazing.